In a quiet town nestled in the sprawling landscapes of North America, there lay an old, forgotten graveyard. Overgrown with wild weeds and surrounded by a rickety iron fence, it was a place shunned by the townsfolk. They whispered stories of strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions, but most dismissed them as mere legends. However, a discovery one crisp autumn morning would ignite a chain of terrifying events, forever cementing the graveyard's place in the annals of horror. Jenny Harper, a local historian with a penchant for uncovering the town's hidden past, had been researching the graveyard for months. On this particular morning, armed with her notebook and camera, she ventured deeper into the graveyard than ever before. Her footsteps crunched through the fallen leaves, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. As she approached a dilapidated mausoleum, partially concealed by creeping ivy, something caught her eye. Protruding from the earth, just behind the mausoleum, was a small, dirt-covered object. Curiosity piqued, Jenny knelt down and began to dig around it. Her fingers brushed against something cold and hard. With a final pull, she unearthed an old, porcelain doll. The doll was eerily beautiful, with delicate features and glassy blue eyes that seemed to follow her every move. Its dress, once a pristine white, was now tattered and stained. Despite its dilapidated state, there was something unsettlingly lifelike about it. Jenny, both fascinated and unnerved, decided to take the doll back to her home for further examination. That evening, Jenny placed the doll on her desk, its lifeless eyes staring blankly at the room. She began to research its origin, but her efforts yielded little information. Frustrated but intrigued, she decided to call it a night. As she settled into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the middle of the night, Jenny was jolted awake by a loud crash. Heart pounding, she grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made her way to her study. The scene that greeted her was bewildering. Books were scattered across the floor, and her desk was overturned. The doll, however, was nowhere to be seen. As she frantically searched the room, a chilling voice whispered in her ear, "You shouldn't have disturbed me." Jenny spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and she ran to her neighbor's house for help. By the time she returned with her neighbor, the study was eerily quiet, and the doll was back on the desk, its head tilted slightly to the side as if mocking her. Convinced that the doll was cursed, Jenny decided to return it to the graveyard the following morning. But fate had other plans. That night, she was found dead in her study, her face twisted in a grotesque expression of terror. The doll sat beside her, its once serene face now bearing a sinister smile. News of Jenny's mysterious death spread like wildfire through the town. People were quick to blame the cursed doll, but most dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. Among the skeptics was Tom Reed, a journalist eager for a sensational story. Determined to debunk the myth, he decided to investigate the graveyard himself. Tom arrived at the graveyard armed with his camera and a healthy dose of skepticism. He retraced Jenny's steps, eventually finding the mausoleum where she had discovered the doll. As he inspected the area, he felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. Shaking it off, he pressed on, determined to prove that there was nothing supernatural about the doll. That night, Tom returned home with the doll in tow. He placed it on his desk and began typing up his article. Hours passed, and fatigue set in. Just as he was about to call it a night, his computer screen flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. A cold breeze swept through the room, and Tom's breath hitched in his throat. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see the doll, now standing upright, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. Before he could react, an invisible force slammed him against the wall, pinning him in place. The doll's mouth moved, and a raspy voice echoed through the room, "You too shall suffer for disturbing my rest." Tom's screams were cut short as the life was drained from his body, leaving him a lifeless husk. The doll fell to the floor, its expression once again serene, as if nothing had happened. The town was gripped by fear as news of Tom's death spread. The police were at a loss, and the townsfolk began to avoid the graveyard entirely. Among those who refused to believe in the supernatural was Dr. Emily Hayes, a renowned psychologist. Convinced that the deaths were the result of mass hysteria, she decided to conduct her own investigation. Emily visited the graveyard, determined to find a rational explanation for the strange occurrences. She found the doll, lying in the dirt near the mausoleum, and brought it back to her clinic. That night, she meticulously documented her findings, noting every detail about the doll. As the clock struck midnight, a sense of unease washed over her. The room grew colder, and she could hear faint whispers echoing through the clinic. Ignoring the growing fear, she continued her work. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a cold, menacing presence filled the room. Emily turned to see the doll standing on her desk, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent words, "You cannot escape your fate." Before she could react, an unseen force gripped her throat, lifting her off the ground. Desperately clawing at the invisible hand choking her, Emily's vision began to blur. The last thing she saw was the doll's sinister smile, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent triumph. Her lifeless body was found the next morning, the doll sitting innocently on her desk. The deaths of Jenny, Tom, and Emily sent shockwaves through the town. Desperation led the townsfolk to seek the help of Father Michael, an elderly priest with a deep knowledge of the occult. Father Michael, though skeptical, agreed to investigate. Armed with holy water and ancient texts, Father Michael ventured into the graveyard. He discovered that the doll had been buried as part of a ritual to trap a vengeful spirit. The spirit, once a young girl named Abigail, had been wronged and buried alive by the townspeople centuries ago. Her spirit, consumed by hatred and a desire for revenge, had attached itself to the doll. Father Michael performed an exorcism, reciting ancient incantations to banish the spirit. As he sprinkled holy water on the doll, it writhed and twisted, the air filling with agonized screams. The ground beneath him trembled, and dark shadows swirled around him. With a final, desperate scream, the spirit was expelled, and the doll crumbled to dust. The air grew still, and an eerie silence settled over the graveyard. The curse had been lifted, but the memory of the doll's reign of terror would linger in the town's collective memory forever. Years passed, and the town slowly began to heal. The graveyard was eventually restored and turned into a memorial park, a place of reflection and remembrance. Yet, the tale of the cursed doll remained a chilling reminder of the horrors that had once plagued the town. The memory of Jenny, Tom, and Emily was honored with plaques and flowers, their tragic deaths serving as a cautionary tale. The town had learned a valuable lesson: some things are best left undisturbed, and the past, no matter how buried, can always find a way to return. As the sun set over the quiet town, the shadows lengthened, and the wind whispered through the trees. And though the doll was gone, the graveyard remained a place of eerie beauty, a testament to the unearthly forces that had once held it in their grip. And in the stillness of the night, if one listened closely, they might still hear the faint echoes of a child's laughter, a haunting reminder that some spirits never truly rest.